What do you think about that?
It's really good.
Pretty good.
It's a nice springy treat.
It's so perfect for spring.
I definitely associate certain pies with certain seasons. And I don't think there's any bad time of the year to eat vinegar pie, but I will say it definitely seems to fit the warmth and the brightness of spring.
Yeah, and it doesn't require any fresh produce, which is nice, because really there's nothing in the garden yet.
Yeah. When you hear about it at first, vinegar pie does not exactly sound like the most appetizing thing, right? Like vinegar for dessert.
Yeah, but it is so good. It's one of my all-time favorite desserts.
Oh, me too. I love it so much. And I think it's also a dish that really shows how people can be so affected by food narratives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. This is such a simple recipe, but it is packed with complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. So, vinegar pie is in a class of desserts often called desperation pies. And these are old recipes born of hard times and necessity. The idea is that even if you don't have access to or can't afford certain ingredients, you can still make these with just the most basic pantry staples, pretty much whatever you'd already have on hand.
Yeah, and sometimes these recipes mimic an ingredient that you don't have. Either you can't get it or it's too expensive. So this particular vinegar pie that we make is actually a mock lemon pie. And when you combine vinegar and a little nutmeg, you actually get really close to the flavor of real lemons. And
Yeah.
it's pretty impressive.
It's so impressive, yeah. So we've collected vinegar pie recipes from all over West Virginia, and actually not just West Virginia, some
Yeah.
other places too. But we've also collected and we've done a lot of research about people's opinions and the sort of feelings they have about vinegar pie. And this is so fascinating to me because this, as we've learned, can be a very polarizing dish. But the negative thoughts that we've come across have little to do with people not liking the flavor. It's all about these narratives that are shaped by the way we talk about poverty in America. And we too often talk about it as the result of this individual failure. There's this example that comes to my mind of a woman who, when she was a kid, she would invite all of her friends over to her house to eat her mom's vinegar pie because she was so proud of it. But her mom was so embarrassed because she was always afraid that people would think they were poor. And it just totally breaks my heart that people have run away from such delicious recipes like this because of this narrative that's like, if you're eating foods of hard times, it's not because you want to, it's because you have to.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have to, it's because you're poor. And if you're poor, it's because somehow you failed. And when you think about all these systems that we have that are designed to keep people poor, that is not at all a fair story or an accurate story about poverty. So when we talk about vinegar pie, it's certainly not a narrative about poverty being shameful. It is a celebration of brilliance and the ingenuity it takes to make this kind of magic happen with so few resources. Because, people deserve to feel good about their food.
Absolutely. So, we've never met a vinegar pie that we didn't like.
Nope.
But this particular recipe is near and dear to my heart because it was collected in this house on our farm by women in my family. And we've adapted the recipe slightly.
A little bit.
But it was sent into the local newspaper in about the 1930s by a woman named Flossie Hannah. And Miss Hannah lived just on the other side of the county. And she wrote that this recipe had been a longtime favorite in her family. So one day we were looking through a recipe collection found in this house, and this old-fashioned vinegar pie recipe really caught our attention.
And we don't know much about Flossie Hannah, and probably never will, but we do feel connected to her through this recipe. And we know for sure that by taking the time to write this recipe out and to send it to the newspaper, she wanted it to be shared. So I like to think that she would be pretty happy to know that, almost 90 years after she sent the recipe in, that we found it and are now trying to share it with people all over the world. Okay, everything where it needs to be?
Yep, I think so.
All right, let's do this.
All right, let's go.
Okay, so we are ready to start making our vinegar pie. And I guess we should talk a little bit about what we need for this recipe, huh?
Yeah. Do you want to tell them a little bit about the equipment we'll need?
Yeah, for equipment, let's start off with a medium saucepan. You're also going to need a small mixing bowl, a bigger mixing bowl. Wooden spoon is good. Whisk, very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And why don't you tell them about the ingredients?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so for the custard, we're going to need 4 egg yolks, a cup of sugar, a cup of water, 2 tablespoons of butter, 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, a tablespoon of cornstarch, and 3 tablespoons of vinegar. We'll also add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, but we'll talk about the nutmeg here in a minute.
But really, first things first in terms of ingredients, because you're going to need to make this ahead of time, it's a pre-baked pie crust.
Yeah, and you can use any kind of pie crust that you like. We'll often use a pastry crust, just a classic pastry, but we really like to do a crumb crust.
Yeah, a crumb crust is so nice with this pie, and if you guys watched our last video, how to make these communion wafers, then you already have the skills to make our preferred pie crust.
Mm-hmm.
And if you made those communion wafers, you know that they're really delicious, they're nice and salty, and they complement the sweetness of this pie really well.
They do.
And why don't you tell them about this crust?
Yeah, so this is a pie crust that I made last night. It's just cracker crumbs, melted butter, sugar, salt, and egg white. You mix that together, press it into a pie pan, and bake it. And it's as simple as that.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. So we're not going to go through the whole recipe in this video, but we will drop the recipe and the steps for the crust in the description below.
Mm-hmm.
And as with all of our featured recipe videos, our Patreon patrons get one of these nifty recipe cards in the mail. If you've signed up already, you probably already have this at home. If not, we'll put a link in the description below and you can sign up and support our work.
Yep, we appreciate it. Okay, so we're ready to start making our custard. The first thing we need to do is separate out 4 egg yolks.
And I'm going to start with the rest of our custard mix. I've got a little tabletop burner here, and I'm going to get that hot, and I'm going to start by heating this cup of water. And I want to melt that butter right into the water. And while that's happening, I'm going to make a little bit of a mix with our dry ingredients that we talked about. So again, we've got our sugar. We've got our flour. And we've got our cornstarch. Now this cornstarch is another way that we have adapted this recipe. The original recipe from Flossie Hannah did not have cornstarch in it, and it made a really delicious pie, but we found that we wanted it to be a little bit firmer. So we put about a tablespoon of cornstarch. And And finally, I'm going to add the salt. Just put this in and whisk it all together. So now that my water is pretty much ready to go, that butter has melted in, I'm going to add all of these dry ingredients. I'm going to make sure to stir it quickly with a whisk so we avoid all the clumping. After we've whisked it all together, we can start to stir it with a wooden spoon. Okay, and also to this mix, we're ready to add the flavor that makes this vinegar pie what it is. Okay, so of course, for that, we need vinegar. You want to go ahead and put the vinegar that you've measured out in, but I do want to make a point here that this is yet another place where the recipe becomes adaptable. And part of that is because vinegars are of different flavors and different strengths. We use apple cider vinegar for this, and we've got, a couple different kinds of apple cider vinegar that we make here. This one has been aging for a lot longer than this, so of course there are a lot of different flavors.
And quick note here, the 3 tablespoons that our recipe recommends works for most vinegars, including most store-bought vinegar, but feel free to adjust it to your own taste.
And of course it is the vinegar that gives the vinegar pie that kind of brightness and tartness that you would expect from a lemon. But there's something that's missing from vinegar alone if you're trying to imitate that flavor, and it's that fragrance that a lemon has. So to mimic that, we actually use the nutmeg. Just a half teaspoon of nutmeg goes a long way here, and surprisingly, it gives it a flavor that really closely resembles the flavor of lemon.
Yeah, and so the nutmeg is really what makes this vinegar pie a mock lemon. Not every vinegar pie is a mock lemon, but this one with the addition of nutmeg is a mock lemon pie.
And we'll just taste it here. Make sure we're on track. Tastes pretty good to me. And then we're going to let this mixture just kind of hang out on pretty low to medium heat. What we want is for it to just get pretty smooth, and it's going to thicken a little bit. You want to stir it pretty consistently, pretty constantly, because this will tend to kind of clump up on the edges of the pan, and it can get away from you pretty quickly if you're not careful.
So while he's stirring that, I'm going to put those 4 egg yolks that I separated into our medium mixing bowl, and I'm going to whisk these until they're one consistency.
And I've been working on this mixture at my station, and it looks ready to go. And now that this mixture is pretty much exactly where we want it, we are ready for our next step, and that's to pour this hot mix into those beaten egg yolks that Amy's been working on. Okay, now in this step, we are especially careful to pour this in pretty slowly. Anytime you're adding hot liquid to raw eggs, you risk overcooking, cooking immediately upon contact. So that's why we like to make this a 2-person job. It allows one of us to pour in slowly, the other person to whisk the egg yolks. Okay, so now our custard mixture is mixed nicely into these beaten egg yolks, and we are going to transfer that back onto low heat in this same saucepan.
And now that we've put that egg mixture back in the pot, we want to be really careful not to overcook it or cook it too fast.
Yeah, some people will do this on a double boiler, and that's a really good way to ensure you don't overcook it. But over the years, we've found that just keeping it on low heat and stirring it constantly with a wooden spoon is also pretty effective. Okay, so why don't we take a look here, because this is really getting a lot thicker, and this is a good sign. I still have a little ways to go, but I like what I'm seeing here. I like that it's thickening up so much already. I'm just going to do this for a few more minutes. Okay, so this mixture, I want you to see it. It has thickened up considerably. This is exactly what we want. And we're ready for the next step now. And the next step is to cool it, but we want to cool it rapidly. So the way we do that is to get it out of this hot pan that it's been cooking in.
Yeah, so we're going to put it on a sheet pan. That'll get more surface area and cool it quicker. You could also just put it back in a mixing bowl and get it in the refrigerator, and that works fine too.
Okay, so I'm just going to spread it out a little bit more on this sheet pan to help it cool.
And I just want to take note of what a beautiful golden color we have here, thanks to our ladies outside, right?
Yeah, the color of the pie, that intense yellow color, comes from the yolks of your eggs. And our girls have a free-range diet, and that gives their yolks a nice, rich golden color and makes a beautiful custard.
It really does. It's so pretty. Okay, so we are just going to cover this. We're going to cool it in the refrigerator for probably a couple hours, and we'll come right back.
Then we'll fill a pie crust. Our custard has been chilling for a couple hours now, and it is nice and thick and cooled, and we're ready to fill our pie crust.
After you've transferred your pie filling to your pie shell, you will just take the back of your spoon, kind of smooth it all out. And at this point, you are ready to bake it off, if that's what you want to do. You don't have to bake it.
Yeah, you have options. You can take those egg whites that you set aside earlier and make a meringue.
Yeah, but we like to just kind of bake it to get a nice golden brown color on top. So what we're going to do is we're going to put it in an oven, 400 degrees for about 25 minutes or so.
Okay, so our pie is out of the oven and it looks great.
Yeah, it really does. It's the perfect golden brown color. That extra time in the oven has helped it set pretty well. And it's cooled for a couple hours, so we are ready now to cut into it. We're going to dress it with a little whipped cream, maybe garnish with a couple flowers, a little coarse salt. And we're going to enjoy this thing.
It's going to be really good. So there you have it, Flossie Hannah's old-fashioned vinegar pie.
Yeah, we hope you guys make it at home. And if you do so, take some pictures and tag us. We'd love to see what you're making. And come back next month for another featured recipe video right here on our channel.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.